Hello everyone, and welcome to Live on Air this afternoon, the 12th of April. I'm David Bell, and I'm broadcasting on behalf of the Trinity eLearning Centre at Waiake in Auckland, New Zealand. And with me today live on air, we've got Allison Miller and Kristina Hoeppner. And I'd like to just first of all flick over to Allison and tell us a few words about yourself, Allison, your background.
Thank you, David. You've invited me on a topic that's my passion, has been my passion since about 2007, 2008. I was working in a large training organisation that had very clear pathways for their staff, but they didn't tell them. And when you wanted to jump a hurdle, you were required to produce a portfolio of evidence of the last 5 years of your work, which then I spent about 100 hours in 1 year trying to put together this portfolio. At the same time, I read a report from what was then the Australian Flexible Learning Framework about this new up-and-coming e-learning tool called an ePortfolio, and how it was actually going to help people manage their own information for different kinds of transitions. Mine was kind of a pathway, a career pathway there, but also for pathways into education, through education and out of education. And as somebody who's been pretty passionate about lifelong learning for a long time, for me, I see it as key to, how do we help people manage their own learning, and got involved in it through that. And so more recently, I get to work with different universities and groups through ePortfolios Australia. We've been doing that since about 2008, where we try to bring together good practice, so people who are working often in isolation or within their own institute, and bring that practice together and have conversations about what they're doing, and connecting with wonderful people like yourself and Kristina. We've done the Moodle Mahara meetup a couple of times. Ideally we might do that again in 2017, and connecting internationally. So yeah, been fairly busy, and a small component of my business, digital capability, involves working with people to understand the portfolio process, as well as some of the the tools that they can use.
Yeah, I was really grateful for your organising the Mahara Moodle meetups in Adelaide. That was a fantastic learning opportunity for people like myself, to fly across and get more involved. So that was fantastic. Thank you, Allison. Kristina, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you very much, David, and thanks again for the invitation to be part of the session. And over the last 5.5 years, I've been involved with the Mahara project more directly, and I'm the community facilitator and also the project lead. And so for me, that is the biggest connection at the moment to ePortfolios. But before then, I worked at the University of Luxembourg, where we had an ePortfolio component for students in a Bachelor in Educational Sciences there. And that's where I got more deeply involved with portfolios, looking at a couple of different tools, and then implementing Mahara in the study program, and seeing how the students use it in their with their classes, how they reflect on things. And that's how I kind of ended up also in New Zealand, because then in 2010, I decided to move to New Zealand and take on the job and responsibilities of being involved in the Mahara project. So that was a really great time, and since then I've learned a lot from users worldwide, users like yourself, like Allison, and also many university and school users, on what you can do with portfolios, what they might want to do with them, and all these things help us think further along the lines of ePortfolios, or portfolios also in general, in many different contexts.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Kristina. You've got a really full background in terms of doing that, and what I'd like to do is just highlight what the structure of our meeting is, because both of you have got such expertise in this, whereas I'm sort of much more a beginner. And what I'd like to do is select a question that's come through in advance from Halvard Lund. He's asking, what's the structure of today's meeting? Is it like a discussion or more like a lecture? I don't think any of us are good lecturers, so hopefully it's more like a discussion, but Halvard's in Europe, so he's probably not going to be watching, but it was great that he put forward the question to begin with. So what I'd like to do is just bring up a screen share that tells us about today's meeting, and that should be through now. And what we see in the screen share is our topics for today. Our participants will be listed in this PDF, so you can just click on the links. We'll put the PDF at the end of the meeting into both YouTube and on the Google Plus event page. And after a lovely introduction from Allison and Kristina, we're going to be talking about the ePortfolio importance for individuals. We realise they're very important in group situations, institutional settings, but they're really about empowering individuals. So we want to spend some time with that. We want to investigate where they're being used and the trends that have emerged in their use in the last few years. I'll talk just a little about the social learn outreach, because that's a slightly different use for an ePortfolio. And finally, what's the future for ePortfolios? So that, Harvard, is the outline of today's meeting. So without any further ado, either Allison or Kristina, what do you see as, why is an ePortfolio important?
You go first, Kristina.
I go first? Okay. I find an ePortfolio is really important to reflect on things. That's kind of one of the biggest reasons for me. And reflecting, I don't necessarily mean in a very formal way, but it can be in an informal way, just also a short reflection. Oftentimes, what we've seen with students is that they just get really scared by the term reflection, because it always seems to entail a lot of effort. But actually looking at it, we reflect on things every single day, lots and lots of times during the day. It is really inherent to us, because through reflection we learn. We change our behavior, we change what we do, we learn from our past actions. And how can we learn? Well, because we ask ourselves, even if it's just implicitly or in our heads, the question of, what could I have done differently? What could I improve? What could I do better? Who may I need to ask next time? What should I leave out? And all these things are, at least in my mind, reflections already. It's just that we don't really think of them as reflections so much, because we don't necessarily talk about them, or we don't necessarily really voice them out. But a portfolio can help us to do that. And so reflection can be something really short, just a couple of sentences. So some people use Twitter for that, and just say something, attach an image these days or video, and briefly tell why that is, why they think this is important. Or others write longer blog posts and put that into their portfolio. And then oftentimes reflections can also look very different from the context in which you need to reflect. So is it a reflection for classroom work? Is it a reflection for professional development? Is it for accreditation purposes? So it can look very different, but essentially I would say, to bring it to a point, it is for us to learn from our past behavior. That's what I think an ePortfolio is really great at.
It's interesting. I'm just writing some things about reflections, and it happens in a whole range of different situations. For me, the ePortfolio it comes back to lifelong learning. For a long time, we talked about lifelong learning. It kind of got old and boring, and people moved on. So we've kind of come up with other terms. But what I'm seeing in Australia, in particular, and perhaps even in my own state, where there's a lot of change, where we're moving away from manufacturing. So the last white goods to be produced in Australia will be this year, when the Electrolux closes down in New South Wales, and We've got Holden's closing down and Ford's closing down. So, historically this was the bread and butter, and certainly paid my parents' wages and our mortgaged for me to grow up and get the education that I've got. And so what we're seeing is that change is happening. It's happening very quickly, and the sorts of skills and knowledge that we need people to have is dramatically increasing. And as part of that, they need to be able to problem solve and reflect, which is what Kristina's talking about. But there's a whole process behind how do you actually help somebody manage how to be current and continually learn and improve in what they're doing. And so for me, the ePortfolio process, or some people call it the ePortfolio approach, is really empowering people to manage their own learning and their own information. So it helps them understand what is it that I need to achieve, how do I need to achieve it, how do I know when I've achieved it, how do I grab some evidence to demonstrate that I've achieved it, and then how can I present that evidence in such a way that the third party that needs this information from me can use it, so it's not just this massive dump of different sorts of files and so on. And then that way what it does is, what I've known, when the future wants to know about my past, so what I've found is, that sometimes they'll say, show me how you've done that before, and it can be for applying for a grant, it can be for applying for a job or a promotion. Then I need to sort of somehow be able to quickly and easily bring that information together. So if we help people understand how to manage their own information through an ePortfolio approach, then they're already on the journey for when the future says, well, show me how demonstrate to me how you got this skills or this experience to move to this next stage in life. So yeah, that's how I see it important for individuals.
And Allison,
oh, sorry, Kristina, you go.
Allison, what you said about the evidence is really important there, and it might have gone under a bit. And because yes, you can describe your skills, you can describe your capabilities and what you have done, but that doesn't mean that the person reading about those things actually knows what to make of it, because they always interpret what you have actually written and understand it with their background knowledge and their context in mind. So if you describe something that you've done in Australia, it might make perfect sense in Australia, but not necessarily in New Zealand or somewhere in Europe. And so we always come with our preconceived notions in there. But if you attach the evidence, then I can look at it and I know immediately or more easily, oh, that's what you mean. That's what we talk, or that's what we call X, Y, Z. And so having that evidence as part of the portfolio, that makes it a really, really important part.
Kristina, I think you mentioned Twitter just as sort of a micro-blogging site. People get involved with that, or they get involved with Facebook, or the variety of social media. And it seems to me that a lot of evidential learning has been distributed across many different kinds of media now, and the ability to reflect, which both you and Allison have mentioned, is lost because there's not an easily apparent way of bringing all of these evidences, all of these reflections together. And that's where I would say that the importance of having an ePortfolio that collects all of these things becomes tremendously important for the individual. Either of you like to comment on that?
I agree, David. Nowadays we use so many different social media, and sometimes I'm afraid of even starting to use a new one, because then there is yet another tool to check, because people are on multiple networks already. But what I've also seen is that you do have your little communities. So I post different things on Facebook than I post on Twitter. And then on other social media, on YouTube, again, it is very different. I don't really engage there much. I engage in other social networks. LinkedIn is yet another possibility. And so it makes it feel really fragmented. And what I like about an ePortfolio platform is that we, as you say, can aggregate everything in there. We can curate it there. We can put things into perspective and connect to all the very different places where we are present without having to send the person who needs to look at things out to all those different channels and give them hundreds of different links, but we can just have everything in one place and kind of really build up a personal presence, a personal learning environment with that we take as a hub to move to the actual places where the evidence is visible.
My take on it, and since I've moved into my own business, is I now have a business website, and my business website now becomes the product of my kind of process of learning and experiences. So I now see my business website as the portfolio, and often I'll use some of the social spaces, those social media spaces, to bring people to that, or to validate who, you know, I can say stuff, but I can then validate that by that evidence that you were talking about before, Kristina, by bringing them back to this space and saying, you know, I'm saying this, and I can say this because I've done this. I'm not just kind of making it up. So, you know, there's two components of it. The social media part is the reflective dialogue. So the ePortfolio, if you're going to use it as a personal private learning space, which often in educational organisations, that's what it's encouraged to be. It's a space usually contained for learning in and about what's happening in the university or the school or the training organisation. But then you need to have reflective dialogue. And that's what I love about Twitter. You can put information or comments out there, and a conversation starts to happen. And you start to think about what other people are thinking about, and that's where new ideas or solutions come for problems. So how you connect that all back, Kristina might be able to explain it better, or there may be the progress of it. There is an API, they're calling it Experience API, where the idea is that where your presence are across the web, that you can aggregate it. You know, Tumblr is probably another example where people are already doing that, where they're already aggregating some of their social media into one space. So we are moving to that model. But if we've got a whole heap of information, it's really useless unless we know how to apply it, and that's where the ePortfolio process becomes so important. So I know that you know, by writing something or asking a question, getting that information, and then applying it in a situation, and capturing evidence that this has worked for me is really important. But you know, I'm one of a small percentage of people who think like that. The average person doesn't think like that. So we need to build in the education systems, and I'm talking about higher ed as well as in compulsory education levels, where we are teaching people how to capture their, you know, set themselves goals and guidelines or outcomes that they want to do, understand how to get there, how to capture that evidence. So it's that kind of process that's really important. And then when they'll recognise through the conversations through social media, when they recognise they might put something in a private reflective journal in their ePortfolio, or they might, you know, just add a link to their website to remind themselves and to show to others that they've got these skills and experiences.
I think that's a very important aspect that you've raised there, Allison. It actually is not just the importance of the ePortfolio, but how they're being used, where they're being used. And you mentioned Tumblr, which is a site that I don't use. As a matter of fact, I came to ePortfolios before I came to any other social media, which is probably quite the reverse of most people, because social media had zero attraction for me, because like Facebook seemed a stream of unending photographs and family shares, and you know, even the business pages didn't really seem to get to the heart of anything particularly deep, you know. And I realise now that they simply wanted me to dig a little further into their site, you know, one more click kind of thing till you got to the magic point of let's buy for this. So I look at the ePortfolio as being something very different from both what you and Kristina are suggesting, but at the same time it's so broad that it can accommodate a number of different capacities. So, Allison, across Australia, where do you see the ePortfolio as being used?
So from the experience I have, for ePortfolios Australia, we run 3 events, so a major kind of 2-day thing that this year's going to happen in Sydney, and we've run that. The forum in its current format, we've run for about 5, well, I think this is the 6th year we'll do it, or 5th year that we'll do it, and then we had a couple of major conferences before that, and some webinars, as well as some e-updates and so on. So for me, if I look at who's doing what and where, it's very obvious to me for Australia that it's the universities that have really, they take the lead. So if I look at the number of presenters or the number of people who come to these events, we are all generally speaking about universities. And so it fits in because reflective practice fits in really good with academic education. They also have their learners for 3 to 4 years, maybe longer if they go on and do postgrad. Whereas in our vocational education training sector, sometimes people can only be there for 3 months, so it's very hard to implement a ePortfolio process. I'm aware that it's happening in the school sector, but we just haven't been able to, in all those years, get a cohort of school teachers to come on board, and it may be because we still speak in a very adult education language, and so therefore they don't see themselves sitting where we are. So within the universities, and then the 4th group we've got is professional associations, so professional bodies that either have some sort of mandated standards. So here in Australia, nurses have to undertake 20 hours of continuous professional development. It's mandated, and at some point they may be asked to demonstrate that they're doing this, and demonstrating they're doing it against a set of standards. Some of our states and territories require school teachers to demonstrate against a set of standards, and we're trying to work that into a national thing through the Joy of Federation here. So you've got those. If I think about the universities, who probably make up, in my experience, I can't speak for the school sector, but probably about 90% of the ePortfolio activity, they then, reflection's really important, but they then also kind of filter into 2 ways. One is they're in the health sciences or in the teaching professions, and so they know that their learners are going to be asked to present this evidence. So why not start to help them build the skills on how do you do that process I'm talking about? You've got a target, because this has been set for you by the professional body. You've got to reach that target. How do I reach that target? How do I know I've reached that target? How do I get the evidence to reach that target? How do I present that evidence to the professional body so they know that I meet that target in an easy format? The other way they've gone down is graduate outcomes or graduate outputs. So universities, they're in an era still talking about finding people jobs rather than helping people create jobs. And this is another little kind of soapbox thing that I've picked up in the last 12 months. We still talk about we're producing employees when really we should be producing employers as well as employees. And so they use then the graduate capabilities or attributes as a global thing across the degree, and then they use reflective practice to connect what they're doing in a particular area in the university course to how it might apply to them when they get out in, I was going to call it the real world, but like out in another situation that's not education. So I'm sure that universities are real worlds too. So yeah, that's if you follow anything that ePortfolios does, that's what you'll see through the presenters and through the people who interact with the activities that we put on.
Okay, that's really helpful in the Australian scene. Kristina, both the New Zealand scene and perhaps Europe and America.
So from what I've seen in New Zealand, I would say it's slightly different from Australia for a number of reasons. Because I still feel that we have more school users or more active school users then we have university users. Because there are only very few numbers of universities or tertiary institutions in New Zealand, and many more schools. But secondly, and primarily, because there is a national ePortfolio instance that every school can use for free, because it is still supported by the Ministry of Education. And that is myportfolio.school.nz, which is based on Mahara, the open source ePortfolio platform. And back in 2008, the ministry decided to institute this installation and allow every school to be on there, every teacher, every student, and really make it somewhat of a school lifelong ePortfolio, because as long as you were at school, no matter whether you're a student or a teacher, you can have an account there. And even if you switch schools, your portfolio stays with you. And you don't have to create it.
Sorry, did that carry on to the university level after you primary, secondary, and then into tertiary?
That is that was the original intention, because there's also myportfolio.ac.nz, so the tertiary equivalent, so that you, once you finished school, you would actually, or you could take your portfolio and import it into the university equivalent. It wouldn't be a seamless way at the moment. It's not a seamless way. You do have to perform an export, but and an import. But at least it's the same software. So that is already more easily done than if you had to work between softwares. And also because every school can connect to the same ePortfolio system, students and teachers don't have to worry about losing content when they move to a new school, or who might have a different system, but everybody is on the same system. Everybody can have an account. So it also makes it easier to connect with others, to get feedback from others outside of your school, but still within the school sector. To invite other people or other teachers from a different school to check out examples or work together on portfolio guidelines, or students connecting together across schools and doing a project work, or teachers who are new to portfolios, they can contact others who are already more experienced on the same platform and start discussions together. So it's not just, my portfolio is not just an ePortfolio platform where you create your personal portfolios, but it's also there for collaborating and for working together on projects, for discussions, so that you can have a better experience and grow together and share things together. And all in a safe environment, because it's hosted in New Zealand, and only people from schools and certain support organizations have access to it. A few years ago, also a number of university programs gained access, because they said, well, we are training the future teachers, so we should be using the same platform that we are then going to use when we are actually teachers. And that makes really good sense, because that way they can communicate with teachers when they are helping out at schools or when they have practicums, and therefore really are already in the same space. So in New Zealand, I would say more school users than university users, but we do have a number of very good and very prolific university users in the education sector, in the health sector. So nursing students do use portfolios, for example, at Unitec quite a bit, and then also AUT University has a strong portfolio component. They host their own instance themselves. But whether it is on a multi-tenanted instance or on your own doesn't really matter. And also the Open Polytechnic of New Zealand is reinvigorating its program of ePortfolio use in a lot of ways around degrees that then lead into professions. Like Allison mentioned, if you are in a profession, you kind of need to show your capabilities, or you have free accreditation going on after a few years. So getting the students used to the processes of reflecting according to a standards framework or according to a competencies framework does make sense, because again, that just paves their way forward in the future. And briefly looking at the international scene, from what I know across the Mahara user community is that it seems to be more used at the university level. So in the United States, we have frequent interactions with university users, in Canada as well, and across Europe as well. there are definitely also pockets of school use, and it might just be that we are not aware of them so much that they just do their own thing. Because with portfolios, especially when they are on a platform like Mahara, is that you don't automatically have access to it, in contrast to you being able to find anybody in any other social network unless somebody has set their profile to private. And so oftentimes if people don't engage as much in the user community, we are not necessarily aware of what they are doing because it's not as visible. And it seems like that university lecturers or learning technologists or ePortfolio officers seem to be communicating more because it is their role at university or part of a role that they have, whereas at schools it might be regular teachers only that foster the ePortfolio thinking, or it's just one teacher in a school and not many others.
How about in Europe? There's been quite a move, hasn't there, in across the EU to somehow get some kind of standard ePortfolio. Has that been successful?
Over the last few years, there have definitely been a number of projects, and one of the most or one of the bigger ones was definitely Europortfolio or EUfolio. Where they looked not just at one particular technology, but really at the pedagogy behind ePortfolios, and also did a survey across many different countries looking at what is actually being done. And that was, to my knowledge, more specifically for the school sector. I think it also touched on the university or tertiary sector a bit, but a number of schools were involved in that. And currently there's also a new ePortfolio project going on, at least between Austria and Slovenia, where again they look at ePortfolio use with students and how that can be improved, getting more information on how it can also be supported more. In terms of standards, I'm not aware of any standardized portfolio simply because there are so many different tools available. So it is oftentimes more around pedagogy. And a few years ago, there was the Leap2A export, which is an ePortfolio standard, which was developed to make it easier to export and then import your portfolio into another ePortfolio instance, and not necessarily of the same platform, but also a different one. But it seems that that isn't really being taken up by a lot of platforms these days.
David, can I add a little bit more about some of the stuff that I see on the international, perhaps it's the US, the North American, in terms of the use of the portfolio?
Yeah.
So when I haven't been there for a little while, for a couple of years, but when I was there and did some work, ABLE's a big group, AAEEBL. I'm not going to pretend I'm going to remember all of what the acronym stands for, but it's around experiential kind of alternative learning approaches. And what I saw, there was a couple of kind of areas that they were using it there. One is that some of the universities and colleges I'm going to talk about were actually using it to demonstrate for their own reaccreditation purposes. So they have to demonstrate that students are actually reaching some of their learning outcomes. So this is a requirement of the tertiary education organisation, and some organisations were going down very much down a kind of back-end dashboard, you might call it learning analytics kind of approach. And a number of organisations who felt that testing wasn't the only way of demonstrating learning outcomes took the ePortfolio approach. So they actually used it to drive really good educational practice at the same time, solve a pain point for them, which was demonstrating their accreditation. They also, what I saw is, and I think it is still led by LaGuardia Community College, around self-efficacy, and where you've got people in LaGuardia Community College often go there who are from lower socio-economic groups who aspire to go on to do a 4-year college degree or a university degree, sorry. And they actually, LaGuardia led, and so numbers now of universities in the US have this approach where they help the student unpick who they are and what it is that they really want to do and where they want to go, and then use some of that evidence to get them into these universities. And I just remember one example of a lady a student giving a presentation, and she said she'd gone to LaGuardia thinking she was going to be an accountant. She had a very Eastern European voice and so accent, so I assumed that perhaps this was something that everybody might aspire to do, because what she found by going through this process, this portfolio processes, really she wanted to be a marine biologist. So somewhere along the line, she'd been fed this line that, an accountant makes money and, has status and stuff. But when she unpicked what it is that she wanted and what she was passionate about, she was obviously on a total different pathway. And for, a passionate educator that I am, I was just like, well, that's the biggest goal that you can score. If you can actually help people understand who they are, what it is that they want to do, and how they're going to get it, they've done that. And then just the last example from that space was, it's self-promotion. So you've got 300+ million people. I know that means more opportunities, but also there's a lot of people vying for those opportunities. And one business college was talking about that their graduates, the employers of large employers of these graduates would not take them unless they had some sort of public-facing portfolio, like a website or something.
That's really important.
Yeah, if they didn't know how to manage themselves, their own profile online, how are they going to help the organisation use the social media spaces for their own business? So it was, they were business students, so it was an educative kind of industry driven thing for them as well. So there's just some examples that I saw in the US coming out of there.
I'd like to just stick with that for a few moments. The question that I've got next is the trends that have emerged over the last few years, but it seems to me that one of the most identifiable trends that ePortfolio use picks up the need for, call it self-promotion or however you want to look at it, it's picked up by the use of the open badging system. And I was never quite convinced by ePortfolios alone. ePortfolios are a great way of aggregating things, but the power of the open badging system used in conjunction with the ePortfolio seemed to me to be kind of like a quantum leap. And I became converted at an ePortfolio conference over in London, and then went to the Mahara conference down in, I think it was Brighton that year. And the London conference concentrated on the power of the badging system and how you might use it in the ePortfolio. And obviously the Mahara conference really looked at the ePortfolio. But it seemed to me that, yeah, there was a quantum leap. There was a sort of a burst of energy around the idea of a different kind of credentialing from what universities did. And I think that's the point that you made originally, Allison, that it's not about, as it was when we went to school, it's not about reproducing very well-crafted essays that are, immaculately footnoted and all of the rest of it, but rather it's about real-life learning and how we're applying what we've learnt and how we can get it credentialed. Any comments about that? Kristina, you just brought up a helpful reference to that. What do you make of the the open badging system in conjunction with ePortfolio?
I think they make really good sense together, because for a badge, and for anybody viewing who hasn't heard of open badges before, it is, as David said, a micro-credentialing system, but it can also be used for bigger credentials, so that an entire study program could be credentialed. So universities are looking into that besides grades, or that it can be used to credential certain graduate attributes, or you can just use it for extracurricular activities. So there were 2 summers of learning, one in LA and another one in Chicago, where school students could go around the cities and earn badges by doing certain activities. And of course, by doing that, they didn't just get a pretty picture, But what is actually the important part about the open badges or the online badges is that you do have the evidence embedded within it. So there is some metadata in the picture that can be read out when you look at the badge online, which says why you've earned the badge, who issued the badge, whether it expires at some point, and then what were the criteria for earning that badge, and also where is the evidence. So there's a link to the evidence, or you can upload the evidence if the badging system that is being used doesn't allow for direct linking to it. And that's, I think, where the big connection to the portfolio is, because for the badge you provide evidence, and so where could you store that evidence? Well, it could be stored, of course, in a learning management system or on a provider's website, but the evidence could also live in your portfolio, or it could be a project that you did on your portfolio for which you earn a badge. Or if we go just in the simplest fashion, health and safety, in a company, everybody could earn that badge and needs to demonstrate how they have, or what, that they have done it, that they know health and safety. And so you could kind of use badges to build up skills and make them more visible, because while we can, of course, list all of the professional development workshops we've participated in, or any other workshops that we went to nicely in a CV and have a neat long list there, when you look at that stuff online, it doesn't really look so pretty. Whereas if you have the badges there, it makes it also more interesting to look at things. But it's not just about the prettiness or the good design, because sometimes lists are really, really helpful. But if you want to highlight certain things, whether you do that with a badge on your portfolio, on your resume, online, on LinkedIn, or on your blog, or wherever, that oftentimes draws more attention than a simple text link. I'm now health and safety certified, or I participated in a puppet course, or in a MOOC, or things like that. So kind of having the possibility of actually making that visually more important, and then store all that information that goes with it that you normally have on a regular certificate in the image that you can get on demand, and see if you're really interested in what is behind this image. Then you can explore further and go down the route into the ePortfolio and view more of the actual evidence. But it's not just that open badges should be for credentialing, just courses or things like that. They can also be used for very much informal learning or non-formal learning, kind of like the MOOC that you offered, David. And also the badges that you offered through Trinity last year, for example, what you were talking about, Mahara, that was really interesting to get people involved in a community and give them responsibility and also acknowledge them for what they have done, and then link that to the evidence that they can say, yes, well, I am the leader for this group, and here are the reasons.
Yeah, I may come back to that, Kristina, but in the meantime, Allison, how widely used are open badges in the Australian environment?
So, I was just thinking about universities. I know that there's some universities who dabbled in it. In fact, it was, I think, the first Mahara that from Deakin that I saw somebody there. What I'm seeing now is actually it's two approaches. One is Deakin Digital. I'm just going to put the link in the text chat. Deakin Digital was an arm of Deakin University in Melbourne, and what they're doing is actually going to employers and saying, look, we can recognise, we're going to come in and assess what your staff can do, and we're going to give them this micro-credential as well. And so the idea, you assume the business model is that we now make a business relationship with you. We can see who in your staff have got the skills and capabilities to then come and do some of the bigger qualifications or degrees that we offer. So Digital Deakin are taking a very kind of we would call it a recognition of prior learning approach to what skills do people already have before they get to university, and let's just teach them what they don't know rather than they're all empty vessels. The other one we're seeing is coming from the Australian Institute for Training and Development. So again, this L&D approach where they're looking at using or are using open badges for their members in terms of the different things that they do, but also it might be about volunteering. So if you're on the board or you're running a group for AITD, you're acknowledged through this digital badge. And for me, I just see it's a progression. A number of years ago, we did some work around a digital certificate. So the Australian University, I haven't got that right, in Canberra. Excuse me, apologies, I haven't got the
University of Canberra.
No, it's Australia. It's not Australian University. Let me come back to which universities. They actually have been issuing for a number of years their parchments and their transcripts as digital parchments. It happens a lot in the US. It's happening across Europe. And this digital concept, people go, people can fake stuff. Well, it's not that hard to fake a qualification on paper. You go to a printer and they'll be able to do wonders for you. Whereas when you get an open badge or a digital certificate and it links back to the source of truth, so it links back to the university, it links back to the employer or the issuing body. I know with PhDs that come out of Stanford University, they host it on their library's server. And so when they issue the PhD and the dissertation, I think they call it, the dissertation is sitting on the. So how can you fake that you have, you've got a digital certificate to say you've got this PhD through this? How can you fake it when it's sitting actually on the university's server? So we've got a long way to go, but it's certainly, for me, I don't understand why we're not a lot further along that way in terms of credentialing and micro-credentialing.
Well, I think this is a really interesting conversation because it underlying it illustrates the power of both the ePortfolio in conjunction with the credentialing. Now, I've taken a slightly different tack around how I use ePortfolios, and I came to adult education much later in life because I'm a Methodist minister. I've been used to working with parishes and people in church-related and theological situations as opposed to formal learning structures. But I had 3 years where I was meant to develop resources for the Methodist Church of New Zealand, and then 6 years as principal of the Theological College. And in that time, that's where, like a typical church person, I said, no, I don't want to know anything about social media, not necessarily evil, but complete waste of time. And then when I learnt about the way in which Mahara might be deployed, and then in addition to that, the way in which open badging might be deployed with it, I came to realize that there was a unique social learning, informal and non-formal situation that could really enhance a whole lot of people's lives. And I began the development of that. Well, subsequently I retired, but I've kept that vision alive in a thing called Kiwi Connection. I'll just see if I can bring up a screen share around that. I may not be able to at this point. No, don't think I can, so I'll cancel that out. What I managed to do was build a series of what I called micro-moocs. Now, these are informal, on-the-job learning experiences. So let's take a very simple example. We ran a micro-mooc called Introduction to Carl Gustav Jung. And we made 6 or 8 introductory videos onto YouTube, then put them into Mahara page, and said, well, if you want to earn an open badge, what you've got to be able to do is to comment on the video, and of course there'll be people in the micro-mooc, in our Mahara instance, who can comment on your comments. And there's never any suggestion that this would be in any way academic requirements, but rather, did this video interest people? Were they sufficiently motivated to be able to get through the whole course? Now, we've only been running the Kiwi Connection for a few months, so I can't say that we've got a lot of people that have completed micro-moocs at this point. In fact, the one that's closest to completing is my second eldest daughter. She talk about the family business. But in addition to those micro-moocs, what we also found with our Mahara instance is that we had a tremendous, we had a lot of people who were highly creative in their church contexts in terms of outputting. So we might have artists, we might have craftspeople, people that make toys, etc. So we moved the Mahara instance to be able to incorporate our live on air, which we're participating in now, so that Mahara became integrally part of a YouTube, our Mahara instance became integrally part of a YouTube channel. And that enabled us to promote our YouTube videos in such a way that actually they're, in terms of theological subjects, in terms of church sermons, worship leading, it's not the most attractive subject in the world, but the packaging has become so attractive that we've really got some highly creative people now producing. So like at the end of this live on air, you'll both get live on air presenter badges from Open Badge Factory, and this is where it becomes a real logistical kind of feat for us. We award the badges, but then we have to go through a whole logistical exercise. A lot of people that are in social learning don't necessarily want to self-promote, which brings us back to your original point, Allison. How do you share the badge? How do you share your learning? But as time is going on, we're finding more and more people becoming interested in the Mahara instance as a social learning platform. So in a sense, we don't fit the mold. We certainly don't credential academically, but we do award badges for both formal and informal learning. And in fact, we developed a badging structure so that we could award the community theologian badge to people who had either completed micro-moocs, might be 6 micro-moocs or 4 micro-moocs, or their equivalent. And so we've got a series of people who are now what we call community theologians that have produced both in an online sense and also taken that information, that learning into their local live face-to-face church communities. And I'd be interested to just check with the two of you whether you see any other instances of social learning like that using, well, whether it's a website like Allison's business or an ePortfolio system like Mahara. Do you see any instances of social learning? Because I actually think Mahara is a fantastic tool for doing this.
Allison, does something...
Sorry, yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting, David, your conversation about Facebook, but really Facebook's about, there seems to be, I always say there's a lot of babies, what are it, babies and animals. That's what Facebook is for me, babies and animals. But actually there's a lot of learning that goes on. There's a lot of learning that goes on there, and the other place for me is in LinkedIn, and it's within the groups within these places. And somebody once called it stealth learning. Like people don't even know, they don't kind of go, oh, I'm learning today. But my husband's an electrician, and he's part of a group of electricians from Facebook who share all of these photos of people who produce really bad, instances of electricity that can kill people, and they have conversations about, why is it bad, and how they should have kind of done it better. Now they're a bunch of blokes that last thing they'd be talking about is, oh, we're learning from each other. They probably just want to see who can get the worst example of what they're doing, but they are learning. So how do they evidence that? How do they might use an open badge is not a direct correlation, but I see that there's a lot that the social media spaces, and I think Mahara's killer part of it is the groups, where I can hear teachers' voices saying, we didn't realise how creative our students can be within these groups. So,
precisely. That's the key, when the teacher suddenly realises the creativity of either the adult or the more junior student learner. Yeah.
So by providing the space where people can come together and share, perhaps in maybe if it's a Mahara that's a part of an educational organisation, it will have some safe structures, and that's what you want. You want to teach people good digital literacy alongside what's happening in as they learn very experientially in some of the public social media spaces. So yeah, I think the group aspect for me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Kristina.
Well, and I agree with Allison there, and it's also, especially if you have an environment where people can come together, that it should be open for people to set up their own groups or start conversations, so that it doesn't become a hurdle. Because when you're in a learning management system, you always have to ask an administrator or a teacher to set up a course for your similar structure, whereas if you are in a more social learning ePortfolio environment, you could leave that up to the learners, so that they can get together easily in a structure that doesn't require a lot of overhead, and they can just talk. Or because there's a profile, students leave messages on their walls, so they communicate that way. They ask questions, or they set up a group just for themselves in which they can ask questions away from the teacher and in a safe space that they think they need in order to have their questions answered, but not always making it visible to others. And so having the incidental learning, the self-learning, really like that term, Allison, there. And also, just make it less visible and always just having your finger right in it. And so that really helps to bring also different groups of people together, because it's not always only students learning from students or students learning from teachers, but it is also teachers learning from students, or everybody else learning from other people who are in their network. And I mean, a few years ago we talked quite heavily about a personal learning environment or personal learning network. The term is still around, but I don't think I haven't really been hearing so much about it anymore. But it is essentially what we are setting up. We are networking with others. We are sharing in our different circles. And these circles can look different depending on the platforms that we use, simply because there are different users in there. But at some point they do overlap, and so we cross-pollinate.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful point, Kristina, and it brings us to the fact that we've virtually run out of time. We finished within, we were going to finish within 50 minutes. We'll finish within the hour. We've got 2 minutes to answer Max Thompson's question, which is, Mahara seems to be a well-used platform, but how secure is an ePortfolio in the Kiwi Connection and or Mahara environment for future access? Well, that's, I guess, very much a specific question directed towards Kristina and Catalyst.
Well, I'll try to keep it short, since my clock just shows 1 minute. Basically, we can look at it from many different directions. And the first direction, how safe is my portfolio? I can interpret as who can take a look, who can look at it, who has access to it, and there I must say everything is private at first. So it is up to the individual ePortfolio author to decide what they want to share with the world entirely, so that it can be found by search engines, or just within the Kiwi Connections group, or just within an even smaller group. So it's very easy to just share a portfolio with one person or with 2 people or a small group. So from that standpoint, security is guaranteed because you as author decide who shall have access to your content, and so you can manage that. In terms of security in the regards of longevity, that is up to how long kiwiconnexions exists. And the Mahara platform itself is being developed primarily at Catalyst. We are the main development company, and we are not intending to shut down Mahara at any time soon. So we are still putting lots of new features in. We are having releases twice a year, so bringing new features to users very quickly twice a year is our goal, and we will keep up with that. And so from that standpoint, new security measures get implemented when they are necessary, and it is also secure that the project continues so that kiwiconnexions can also continue offering that. And as long as there's budget available for kiwiconnexions that David can run it, then that platform is there. And of course, if at some point anything happened, then it is still possible to export the content. So that's looking more at the lifelong portfolio side of the content itself, because you can always get your content out. In a very simple term, HTML export, so you can put it on a USB stick and open up again locally, offline, without any internet. So it's can even be viewed without any internet connection. Or you can export it in the Leap2A format so that you can import it back into another Mahara instance. For example, if you moved overseas and didn't want to have a very long latency in getting your portfolio looked at on kiwiconnexions or on any other Mahara instance.
Oh, that's a great answer. Thank you, Kristina. Having been through one total export from 6senses.nz to kiwiconnexion.nz, I can say it's not a process that I enjoyed, but it is certainly one that can be worked through. It just takes a little bit of care. I want to say thank you very much to both of you, Allison over there in Adelaide, sunny Adelaide. And Kristina down in windy Wellington, but it's a beautiful day down in Wellington. Thank you very much for joining me, and we will make this a Creative Commons video, so you're welcome to use it in your own instances. And as I said, you'll be getting live on air presenter badges sent to you probably by the end of today. Any final comments, Allison?
No, I think thanks for the opportunity. I always love talking about ePortfolios. I think for me it encapsulates the importance of lifelong learning and continuous development of it just kind of is an avenue for that. So thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure working with Kristina as well.
Thank you very much for being part of this group today, David. It's been fantastic talking through some of the questions that you have. And I look forward to seeing you, Allison, and any other ePortfolio enthusiasts at some of the events that Allison mentioned in September, the ePortfolio Forum, or maybe even at the ABLE conference in August, or anywhere else in the world where we can discuss any of these questions and others further.
Thank you both indeed. See you later.
Bye.